This week on And You Don't Stop, we follow up with acclaimed author and professor Suhail Dulatzai. Plus, we have the people's poet, Kahlil al-Mustafa, on Rooftop Live. Continuing our conversation with Suhail was powerful as he dropped some more knowledge on Islam and its connection to radical politics in the Americas. Suhail gave us a quick history lesson and talked to us about how Islam has been important to resisting centuries of European racism.
Islam has always been racialized when it came to Europe. You think about the nursery rhyme we were all brainwashed in school, right? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And there's this idea that like Columbus leaves, Spain to embark on this journey and discover like all these new lands. But what was happening in Spain in 1492? That same year was the year that the Moors were expelled from Spain. That's the moment where the idea of white Christian Europe was getting a kind of coherence around itself. And who it was defined against was the figure of the Moor, the black and the Muslim. So much so that when Columbus and the conquistadors came here, right, the way they first started understanding native or indigenous peoples was through the lens of Islam. They would call them Musulman. That's how they referred to them. They didn't know any other way of talking about somebody who wasn't Christian, but who they saw as heathen or savage. So Islam has always had this really racialized relationship with white Christian Europe. So that when we see or think about what happened after 9/11, it might seem like 9/11 was this like interruption or breaking point. And in some ways it was, but when it comes to thinking about the Muslim as a racial other, it's always been that way.
Suhail's right. Post 9/11, Islam has become the new boogeyman. We've seen more anti-Islam sentiment recently after the violent attacks in Paris, where over a dozen people were killed by supposed Muslim extremists. We asked Suhail about terrorism, racial profiling, and how anti-Muslim bias has served as an excuse to further the police state.
Islam or Muslims aren't just being racialized. The Muslim is a racial category, meaning that even those who aren't Muslim are kind of smeared with that taint or that brush. So you hear anti-immigrant narratives coming out of the US-Mexico border debate, and there's this whole fear that they look like Muslims or they might be affiliated with Muslims, right? So what goes along with this is this notion of the terrorist, right? So the Muslim equals the terrorist, but now the terrorist is being expanded to include so-called gang members in urban areas, like youth who the police see as like their enemies. Any kind of protest is now smeared with the brush of terrorism. And again, they have this kind of well-worn category called the Muslim that they can then use to justify more repression, more surveillance, and more control. And I think that's all about controlling dissent. Terrorism is like the 21st century way of saying savage, right? It's a way of marking somebody as outside the boundaries of civilization, outside the boundaries of the human, so that anything that they say in terms of critique or dissent is illegitimate. Their forms of resistance are seen as illegitimate. Their forms of debate and discussion are seen as illegitimate, right? And so to me, terrorism is a way of doing kind of race talk in the 21st century. When a white guy goes out and does a massacre or blows up a building, obviously very rarely, if ever, is he called a terrorist. But even if he was called a terrorist, if they were to go back into his history and say, hey, where's he from? Is he from Ireland? Is he from Britain? Is he from Germany? Is he from the Netherlands? What part of Europe is he from, right? If they were able to do that, they wouldn't go to that country and place sanctions on it. They wouldn't drop bombs on that country. They wouldn't invade that country. Nothing would happen to the country that he originates from. But when we say that, white people are terrorists too, what we're doing is we're normalizing the idea that terrorism exists and the state needs to go and crack down on it. It's this bad, evil thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be critical of people who commit certain acts, but I think when we call it terrorism or we call somebody a terrorist, that's a legal and political category. And when someone falls into that category, then all kinds of laws get mobilized to crush them. You can be tortured, you can be held in indefinite detention, you can be killed. Obama has a kill list with drones for suspected terrorists or militants, right? So as soon as we put the word terrorist on somebody, especially when they're not white, right, that immediately brings to bear a whole legal and political apparatus that is very dangerous.
In light of these biased attacks on civil liberties, we asked Suhail how his exhibit, Return of the Mecca, provided an alternative look into modern Islam and the hip-hop generation.
People aren't really aware of the deep influence that Islam has had, not just on the early part of hip-hop, but its foundation. So what I wanted to do was to say, okay, I want to be able to do this in kind of like a cultural space and like an exhibit space to kind of like show this history. You know, I mean, I think the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of people, whether they're black, brown communities, is, okay, we have these negative images of us, let's create a positive one. And when we say positive, we're really saying like, let's appeal to white people and white expectations about who they think we are. So let's talk with a certain tone, let's not use certain words, you know, let's act civilized, quote unquote, right? It's all about meeting white expectation. I reject that positive negative, because those are political terms. Negative to who? For me, I'm not trying to provide a positive to the so-called negative. What I'm simply trying to do is say, look, there are these alternative histories, particularly to Muslims in the United States, and they're radical histories.
2008, Obama is elected first black president of the United States, and you were writing poems every day for his first 100 days in office. Take us back to that experience during that time, and now we have a little retrospect of the Obama presidency, and what has or hasn't changed based on what you were feeling initially.
For me, I only had an oppositional political identity, right? And I took this moment as a challenge to say, okay, how would I form a political identity that wasn't purely oppositional, that was about what needed to be built, you know? But looking back, specifically on Obama, you know, there's a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. You know, I think we're in an age where people are thinking about legacy, and he's like everyone else, he's thinking about legacy. So I'm really thinking about these last 2 years, what he does with that legacy. I think there's an opportunity to push him right now to continue to pass some more executive orders in these last 2 years in the wake of what's going on with police brutality at Ferguson and Eric Garner and all of those things. So I don't really think it's gonna happen though. I think it's gonna we're still at that grassroots stage. You know, the politics and how we move in has to be local. And we have to figure out what is the specific policies we're gonna push. You know what I mean? Just be more mature in how we're, you know.
For sure, getting that and looking for change.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but I appreciate, you know, what I read about with Ferguson. It seemed like the activists that he met with, they had they were the right ones, you know what I mean? He didn't go to gatekeepers, he went to people who were on the ground, and it seems like he was willing to listen, and he has some actions in place.
You've been working here in LA, and you're contributing now to a web-based series called Rebel Report. Tell us a little bit about that, working on that, and the importance of kind of the media reaching, you know, and being able to depict our own culture in the media.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited about the opportunities we have with media right now. I mean, even from Ferguson, and the fact that, or Eric Garner, if it wasn't for people, you know, posting and hashtagging and all of these things, you know, I don't think this movement would be as big as it is right now, right? And it's an opportunity to go even further in that direction. So I write for this show called The Rebel Report. You should look it up. It's being produced by Flama, and it's a weekly, you know, 3-4 minute comedy news, kind of like comedy, you know, Jon Stewart Daily Show, like, right. About headlines. And we've covered some really important issues. I'm out here in LA on the West Coast now, right. So the Latinos are not Caribbean Latinos, right. You know, different migration, you know, and I have an opportunity to learn. So one of the reports we did was about the word anchor baby, right? Anchor baby is a kind of a derogatory term that the right has conjured up to talk about people who migrate to the United States, to say that they are intentionally having a baby so that they can get access, so they can stay in the U.S. Right. So that's not even happening, right? That's not even the law.
I'm making it up.
It's a word, right, to describe a fear. You know what I mean? Right. And that's how language is used. So we kind of took that apart on the Rebel Report and shine the light back at the fools who are saying this.
Flipped it on them.
Yeah.
That's what it's about, hip hop.
Along with millions of other hope-filled Americans, I tune into America's latest reality television show, Black Prez, from auction block to Oval Office. This was no election. This was a pep rally for imperialism. There is government cheese still in my stomach, which I am still trying to digest. This makes it difficult to stomach the news I see on the television each day. With the value of the dollar declining, maybe the value of people will be on the rise. I can't help but wonder, will young black boys one day be gunned down on Barack Obama Boulevard? Who do we complain about now that the man is a brother? Which member of this, our human family, is without blame for the problems we face? Tell me, who of us will be willing to point the finger at themselves and say, I will tend this garden?